Hello, Barry. I am very much looking forward to going through your review, especially because the first image that you gave me is quite stunning and I really like it. So let's begin by taking a look at the full screen here. And when I first saw the picture, I said, oh, this is going to be a tough one to review simply because I really couldn't see anything that I would change. I really like it. It's a wonderful scene. Now, the only thing that I do suggest whenever I see portraits of people, landscapes, even cityscapes, is that if there's ever a situation where the tip or end or edge of an object is just millimeters away from the edge or the frame, then I usually like to have a little bit more breathing room. Let me give you an example. Take a look at the top of this tree here. Like on my screen, I would say, well, when looking at this, I have about 1 millimeter or maybe 2 millimeter space between the top of the tree and the perimeter. I feel that I'd rather cut this off or have a little bit more space. Either one of those two options are fine. Now take a look at this tree. To see how we can see that obviously the tree extends in real life, extends beyond the border of the frame. That's okay. Take a look at the top of this tree. On my screen, I could say I have like maybe 5 millimeters of space here. I think that's fine, but this one is just a little bit, it just needs a bit more breathing room, or we cut it off altogether. Let me show you. Now this is nitpicking, but often it's just the very smallest things that make a picture even better. So if we cropped down a little bit, just so that it's not something like this. Actually, I would go even further. Let me take a look at this. Okay, that is something that I think would work well. The imagination knows, of course, that the tree extends, but because these trees are cut off, we find that this is totally appropriate to be cut off as well. Now, the advantage of this is, another advantage, is actually panoramics. Whenever we're dealing with a beautiful landscape like this, I often find that landscapes look really good. Now, this is not needed, it's not critical. This pathway that you have is a natural S-curve, which I really like, and I always encourage S-curves. However, if you wanted to frame this, I'd be tempted to actually create a panoramic, something like this. Now, immediately you could say, well, but the S-curve is now ruined. Potentially, however, the imagination is really good at completing S-curves by itself. So we know just by the way that the tire tracks here are curved that this is indeed an S-curve, and the imagination will fill this in. And often when the imagination is taken over because we've cropped out certain elements of a picture, the picture actually becomes more interesting because the imagination kicks into higher gear. Now let's look at this picture before. Okay, fantastic shot. After, I feel that this panoramic crop might be better for printing. We're used to seeing, now keep in mind this is not a perfect panoramic. A panoramic is actually technically much wider. But this would be closer to, you know, maybe a little bit wider than a 9/16. However, whenever you have a situation where your picture is somewhat, quite a bit wider than it is high, then it's really going to look good printed on a wall. So great work with this photo. Okay, let's get to your next one. This is fabulous. Early morning light. This reflection is absolutely stunning. And really, the only thing that I would probably do is just do a quick erase of these little, a little erase of grass of some sort. So I would just go to my healing brush. Now keep in mind, and I've said this before, unfortunately Lightroom CC, at least the mobile version, doesn't do, sorry, Lightroom CC 2018, either mobile or desktop, it doesn't do the very best of healing compared to other software. However, if it's simple and if there's no complicated things around the object that you want to get rid of. It should be fairly doable. So let's take a look here. So far, so good. I've had big fights with some of my own photos trying to get the cloning or the healing done successfully. Okay, let's also try for this one. This one might be a bit harder because of the mountain. Actually, not too bad. Okay, so let's back out here and see what we have. Okay, now as you can see, there's an artifact or remnant of the healing here. And I actually don't even use healing within Lightroom CC. I only did this just to show you what it looks like without those little blades of grass. Usually I go to File, Edit in Photoshop. And that's for people who have I think it's called the Photographer's Plan in Adobe Creative Cloud. So if you have Photoshop and Lightroom CC, then you can actually do a fine-tuned job of erasing within Photoshop. And then when you save and close, the nice thing is the picture comes back into your Lightroom library. It's really convenient. Okay, so if you don't have Lightroom CC, any software will be able to get rid of those little pieces of grass. For example, if you wanted to take this into your mobile device, you could use Touch Retouch app or Photoshop Fix. They do a great job. Okay, so I think that is probably all I would do. I really like the shot. This may be a little bit hot, which means just a touch bright. And if I felt that, I could successfully bring this down because it's a raw image, I would go to my linear gradient tool and I would just do a sort of a really gentle reduction in, not exposure, I'm going to bring that back, in highlights. So I'm going to go down to highlights. And I'm just going to reduce the highlights a little bit. And what this does is it allows us to maintain detail in the beautiful distant mountain. Now keep in mind that this process is best when you have a raw file. This is a JPEG, of course, because whenever I'm doing these portfolio reviews, I specifically ask for JPEGs just because it's easier. However, if you're shooting in RAW and you have access to Lightroom CC or Photoshop or Lightroom Classic, you can make use of the linear gradient tool. And let me show you what it is before. Okay, so you see how it's fairly light up here, and we're almost at the edge of losing detail in the distant mountain. So let's try with the linear gradient. Do you see the difference there? And it would look even better with raw. Now we also have a little situation where we're tending toward the greenish side for tint here, and I prefer to have a landscape or a mountain scene like this with a little bit less greenishness and a bit more magenta. So we're going to go back to our linear gradient. We just touch on the blue dot, and you see how everything turned red here? Well, that's a mask, and it just simply tells us where we've done our work. Okay, now let's go to tint. Now I'm going to show you radically what happens when we go far over to tint, and it doesn't look nice. And let's go over this side. That's on the green side. And let's just go just a little bit to the magenta. Now magenta is the opposite of green. So what we're going to do is just a touch of magenta, and let's just try a little bit of blue. Not much though. Okay, let's go to our before and our after. Okay, that did an okay job. Now see what happened. We have a bit of a magenta feel down on these trees over here, and we were able to maintain it. With a raw file, you'd get a bit better job there. However, I think that right now I'm really happy with the changes. Let's get out of the linear gradient. Let's go to before and after. Very subtle change. You see how we maintained a little bit of the blue here because of the linear gradient. So I think we're ready to roll on this picture. Okay, by the way, I really like the wonderful mist that you have here. Obviously, you didn't make that. That's what it's like early morning, but it just really adds to the picture. One other thing, a lot of people, when they're doing reflections in water, they like to have what's called equidistance. Now, it's not critical because this picture I think is really nice the way it is. However, if you make this into a real panoramic and you sort of measured, even you could put your thumb here or your finger, the distance between this mountain peak here and the edge of your frame, and if you made it equidistant with the distant up here, the distance between the mountain here and the frame, let's just say that this is a perfect equidistant scenario here. Now what this does is it allows us to have sort of a balanced look where we have this distance and this distance to be exact. Okay? I may feel that we want just a slight amount of rotation. Let's try that. Okay, so that looks really good. Okay, perfect. Let's get on to your next picture. Okay, this looks like a wonderful concert, and I really wish I was there. What a beautiful scene. Now, I wouldn't really have, I think your exposure is normal for concerts. Concert lighting is really tricky, and often you can't control skin tone because, for example, right now I know for a fact, because I've shot concerts many times before, that it's a purple light that's illuminating the band. That's why their heads are purple. We don't want to color correct during concerts. It's a useless thing because the lighting is always shifting because they use colored gels over the lights to illuminate the musicians. So I think that we're totally fine for the color down here. We could maybe increase shadow area just a little bit, not too much. That's actually way too much. But just enough to see detail in the shadow area, to see how that brought up the wonderful detail in the background to the stage. Also, I do feel that this would be better as a panoramic. That seems to be a common thread throughout this review. Excuse me. Now, how do I judge a panoramic? Well, I usually try to look for my rule of thirds grid. Here's the grid line here. And if I can sort of make it go along the top of this mountain range, roughly, then I feel that I have a really good composition. Now let's look at this before. Okay, do you see how the background is a little bit too dark and it's sort of a black hole? It sucks light in. However, now we see a bit more detail there, and we have a bit more of a panoramic composition, which really helps. Now, one other thing, it's really difficult to judge straightness with water when we actually don't have just water and sky. For example, if you're photographing the ocean, it's incredibly easy to make sure you have a straight horizon. Not so easy when you're dealing with mountains in the background. However, I do feel that this is a little bit crooked, so let's go to our straightening tool. And if you don't use Lightroom CC, all editing tools have straightening. So let's straighten a little bit. And that looks a lot better. Okay, let's look at the before and the after. Okay, I think it's looking a lot better. It was already a great shot. Nice work on the colors. Also the exposure looks great. I think we're ready to roll for this picture. Okay, let's go to your next shot. This looks like an old-time, what do you call it, a miner's cart. I think it was a good idea switching it to black and white. My only suggestion is that I feel that it's a little bit too claustrophobic on this side. Now, I'm always a stickler for saying give yourself more space in front of the object than behind. Now, you could argue that, well, maybe the direction, the visual direction or the visual flow of this object, this cart, is going from left to right. Therefore, there should be more space over here. Well, that's possible, but I think, and I could be wrong, but this is the front of the cart because it has the hitch here. I have no idea. I just feel that we should have a little bit more breathing room, more space on this side of the cart. So let's even it out. Now, this is not an ideal fix because now I feel that the whole picture is a bit too claustrophobic. But at least the distance here and the distance here is almost equidistant. Okay, so this is sort of the plan B. The plan A, or the better thing, is just to give yourself a little bit more space around the front of the cart, and that would probably be more helpful. And oftentimes, because resolution is so high in cameras these days, if you want to err on the side of being too tight or being too wide, I always suggest to my photo workshop students, err on the side of being too wide, because you can always crop in. Now, the reason I suggest this for this picture, take a look at the shadow area. To see how it has a nice triangle here? I would ideally like to see the end of that triangle. So by giving us a little bit more space on this side, that would be perfect. However, it's a really cool shot, and I really enjoy it, especially the historical context and also your black and white treatment. Okay, so I think this is your last one. And this one really grabs me because I believe it's a Japanese garden, and I visit Japan every year, so I really appreciated this photo. Now, the first thing I do see is we just need a slight rotation clockwise. So I'm just going to rotate. Some software goes in degrees, and other software has usually plus or minus. Doesn't matter. As long as you eyeball it, I feel that, yeah, that's a bit better. So I feel that the water is a bit straighter. And often it's really hard to do this because if we don't have any point of reference of what's perfectly horizontal or what's perfectly vertical, it's really tricky. In this situation, we can roughly go over with regards to the straightening. Take a look at these posts that hold up the bridge, and I feel that that's a bit more vertical now. Okay, so what you've chosen here is to use the, it looks like a pine tree, as a framing device. So this is occupying the top third, and the bottom 2/3 is the lovely garden. And I think this works well. I don't really have anything to comment on it. The two things that you could do with this picture is to use a radical f-stop such as f16 or f22 so that this pine tree is sharp and also the background is sharp. Now, you chose to make it blurry, and I think that artistically that's perfectly fine. In fact, I think both options would probably work equally well. I really don't have anything more to add to this picture. I think you did a great job. My only suggestion is to wait just, excuse me, to wait maybe 5 more seconds so that the duck would be right about here. Now, you could say, well, why would that be an issue? Well, I just feel that the duck is a little bit too close to the edge. This would be a more natural place right here for the duck. And I believe that the duck is going in that direction anyway by the wake. So I would say whenever you're dealing with animals, try to have it so, try to take many pictures. That would actually be the better thing. So you can choose which picture you want for the animal. So yeah, if we could have the duck here, that would be pretty much ideal. Okay, so Barry, that was a great collection that you had, and I appreciate you sending them in. Really enjoyed going through them, and you have an awesome photographer's eye.